So welcome to the Node.js Next 10 meeting for October 12th, 2021. We'll go based on our agenda as was posted in the issue, which is number 164. Before we get started, does anybody have any announcements they'd like to share? If not, we will progress to the agenda itself. First things first, I will paste a link to the minutes. If everybody could add themselves, that would be great. I'm just going to do that while we speak. Okay, and so the first agenda item was planned for the collaborator session in Dublin. So I think we can actually close that issue, but it's probably good that it's in the agenda so that we can talk about sort of next steps and what we should do from there. I did paste into the issue itself a couple of the boards from the sort of top 10 technical priorities and the community discussions. And I guess we should maybe open some issues to review those and take next steps. Any other thoughts in terms of like things we might follow on issues we might open?
Just basically, go ahead, Claudio.
We literally spoke at the same time. So at least for the documentation one, I think just of course an issue to keep track of things, but I think the scale of that one would be open RFC, to propose the changes in the structure and everything that is possibly going to change in the documentation standards. Is there a place where we usually open RFCs or something?
I think so there's two places that I can think of that might be a good place to do that. One, let me find we don't really have an RFC process or anything like that. And I think PRs tend to get the most views. But I think we have like a doc strategy doc. Maybe it's not in here.
Would in this case the PR be the new standard proposal or changes already in the docs? I think the proposal, right?
Right. So, and these are for which docs, or like the core docs, or
the core docs, node/doc/API.
Yeah. Okay. Because I think we have actually a PR doc. Just seeing if I can find that.
Also, should we open only one, let's say, RFC or PR about that, or should we try to split in multiple cases? Because we were talking about on the pure documentation side, how to handle, let's say, the low-level API stuff, but also some kind of more human readable for newcomers, but also E18, in internationalization, stuff like that. Should we maybe before we want to open this PR as a node project, should we try to at least discuss on an issue in the next 10 repository on how we want to split that?
Yeah, that might be a good idea to sort of discuss, see if we can agree among ourselves and then take that to the... I pasted in the chat. There is a link that came out of some earlier discussion in terms of like additions to the style guide to make it easier to parse for TypeScript.
Yeah. Well,
and it kind of overlaps there, so it's but I think like to John's point, it might be good to come up with a strategy, because just putting a huge change in didn't seem to be very successful. Like, I think what we need to figure out is like, here's where we at. What's a nice consumable step that that, you know, we can communicate and people will look at and say, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And then what's the next step after that? And
Yeah. At least in the sense within the changes that we're talking about are not style guide, like for example, how people should place headings and code snippets and formulate things inside the documentation, but it's more like the pure nature of how the metadata of the documentation is done. So for separating, I mean, it's what we discussed on collapse image, having separate YAML files that are purely just for the metadata. For example, what are the methods that that class provides, you know, and you know, when it was added, the history changes, and then having respective markdown files, which are the actual content, examples, description, blah blah.
right. So I understand exactly where you're coming from, but I know from the past discussion on this particular PR, it gets all mixed together. And so like this PR started out as like, hey, here's a whole new thing. And people were like, well, wait a sec, we already have something that didn't like, so, and I know this is called the style guide, but like somewhere in there, it basically, I think now says every, you know, thing should have an example.
Yeah.
And so it's not strictly the style, if you know what I mean.
Yes, it's more like, yeah, I see. It's also how the structure should be done within the, I mean, but that we're talking about is the markdown counterpart, right? So
Right.
one of the ideas here is to extract, for example, that the YAML sections we have inside the markdown and have separate files for them. Also, destruct the current, you know, markdown files to smaller pieces instead of, for example, one big file per module. You have one file per class. Then you have like directories, for example, fs, then promises, then, you know, whatever that is inside there. But I think we are derailing here a little bit. I mean, that's part of the discussion itself. I mean, the original question was more like, where would be a good place for start to kick off this discussion, you know?
Right, and I'm just going to show you like here in this doc, it actually mentions the YAML as well. So I think like what I'd really like is us to get this change landed and then figure out a strategy to add the next step to it, right? And then the next step. And like, I think, so what I'm thinking is like, this is a good place to propose a change. If over time people are like, yeah, okay, we need to expand it out. Like we have in the doc collaborators, there's like, we have like, you know, WASM strategy. I could see us having like a document strategy, but I don't think that would be well received to start with. I think it's better to try and like adjust what we've got in this one document here versus starting a new place until people start to say, well, wait a sec, we need somewhere that has more of the strategy versus the, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, let's do baby steps here. I will give a full read on for example, that PR, because 88 comments that will take some time to go on and see where we are at.
Yeah, and it is one of my goals to, like, I haven't had a chance, but to get back to that and see how we can get that landed, because I think that first step does have some of the things that you know, like always having an example that we talked about, and it's a step in the right direction. It'll help with TypeScript, and then once it's there, it's a good place to then say, okay, what's the next little thing we could.
Oh yeah, because you also have the JSON generation, the docs that are for IDEs, and that could help with TypeScript. That's what you're referring to,
right?
Okay, I see.
But I think the idea of a strategy doc, like John said, in the next 10, it's a sort of a smaller group of place where we can chat about a good strategy and outlining the, like, maybe if you want to open an issue that says like, here's the proposal that says, hey, we talked about all these things, here are the things, you know, maybe here's that other doc that I pointed to, you know, step 1, get that landed, step 2, whatever, and so forth, right? And I think once we have that, we can try and see if we can grow the audience too. Like, are there other people who are docs interested that, you know, aren't here, but that we should pull into the discussion? I know like Rich is often quite involved with them. So it'd be good to say, hey, can you take a look at this, right? And
yeah. Yeah, that completely sounds fine, I think. I can even make a draft issue, which is just to keep, keep it written down, what we talk in Collab Summit, and strictly say, hey, this is a draft that should actually start to be worked on after this lands actually, and then, so we have step by step, like we mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually that fits in, like if we look in what we have in the next 10, there is this doc here, which is, okay, where are we? This tries to summarize where we're at on the different areas. And so like you could update that, like there's a section on documentation and there's like deep dives, right? I think you could add like a second, like add an issue that captures the discussion and output and what you think was agreed, add the link in there that basically says like, okay, here's the, it's what's it, October 2022 Collaborator Summit discussion, so that people can find them. And then the related work or whatever, you can have the link to like what's the proposal, and that sort of all gives us the starting point to say, yeah, this is one of the things that we've identified, we're working on, and people can find stuff.
Yeah, I saw that you actually already made an issue number 121, so I can also just keep the conversation already there. Or does it make sense? Or another one, just October?
Which one was that? The
document metadata 121, next 10.
Yeah, or wait, right, 121. Okay, so that was out of the
PR. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very specific thing. Like that's about like that we haven't even documented our metadata. I think you'd be better off like creating an issue that says, here's the capture of what was discussed at the Collaborator Summit.
Yeah.
Right, because it's nice to go back and say like, hey, we all got together. This is what people seem to agree, and be able to refer back to that. So, and I don't, we maybe you have the, I don't know if we have the issue in this repo where I was going to do a bit of that for the where was it? The plan for collaborator session in Dublin. I was going to use that where I captured like the brainstorms, right? So, but I don't think we have an equivalent one of those for the documentation sessions. So, so I might, I think it would be good to have an issue here that says like Collaborator Summit, October, documentation session, and try and capture everything you think that was agreed and discussed there.
Yeah, sure. I can work on that, definitely. At least, talking about, how the people reacted to what was told there. Initial feeling was that there was no verbal objections, but of course that doesn't indicate anything. But I will also, after I create the issue, try to tag the people that were in the session to see, what are their opinions.
Yep.
Start off, because both Joe and Trot were not, there also remotely. I don't recall.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, putting together like here's the discussion, and then here's the proposed next steps, and then that's a place to, right, like you said, to tag people and say, hey, did I miss something, or do you think this is? Do you like at least get the silent agreement versus the?
Yes, exactly. But I'm sure that, for example, even after we start creating the PR, suppose that things go smooth, I'm sure that there will be a lot of iterations even on whatever that we agree, because what is in my head versus everything that we might need those are completely different worlds, right?
Yep, for sure. Yeah. Well, and even just that, as part of the challenge is that there is a bunch of machinery behind the existing docs, right? So as we find, like even like the metadata, it's one thing to say, hey, we can split that out, but then it's like figuring out what all, of the machinery will need to be updated and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that they made a clone of the tooling because so the current tooling that exists inside Node core uses AST for generating both the HTML and the JSON counterparts, and they created a simplified version of it that also covers everything. The only thing that doesn't do yet is JSON, but the neat part is that I could also add a JSON processor to just, because I already have all the data, and then just create an output. But yeah, if for whatever change that actually happens, to the metadata, definitely changes need to land on either tooling, Yeah, I just find the existing tooling that is in core a little bit too big. There's so many files and there's no like easy written documentation. So when I'm a little bit biased because I wrote the refactoring for tooling that is used on the new Node.js dev website, but I added documentation for every piece, like what this exactly does, why this does this, and etc. And it's very clean code, I suppose. I feel that the initial tooling was created, and just expanded over the time with no real direction as it needed, and it resulted on what we have today. But
we really do miss a lot of documentation, right? Like one of the things that I think would be great would be like in GitHub Node. So like in here, I've been trying to add a few guides, right? Like, there's maintaining, some of them are like maintaining HTTP and the different dependencies. Like a maintaining the doc tooling or something would be probably a great document so that like collaborators come in, they could read that and get an idea of like, well, how does it all work? And,
Yeah, I basically linked to the file where I created the new tooling, just one file. And basically it explains end to end what happens. This is basically just all the utilities that transform the source markdown on what you see in the pages, for example.
Right.
Not sure if you ever had the chance to check the new generated documentation, but basically this is the link. This is how it looks on the new website. But basically, the whole specification is the same, the same output. It's just different style of the website.
Right.
But if I use this script to generate, the same thing should also work on the theoretically on the old infrastructure.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, I think pretty much that's it.
I mean, did you figure out the old tooling and?
Sorry?
It's like, did you figure out the old tooling? Because, I think a short-term thing that would add value would be to actually document the old tooling and add that maintaining, because that helps people. Like if we want to get to the point where there's something new, helping people understand what's already there, I think is a step.
Yeah.
Right.
I think the reason why I decided initially to create a new tooling was the overall structure, how the current tooling was. Even if I added doc blocks, like I think the hard spot is where it starts, where it ends, and how do I iterate, on the things that happen inside. Basically, for example, in the new one, there's this basically one method called create markdown parser, and then it basically says first this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. I'm not sure how much value would be to update the current tooling.
I'm not necessarily like add doc to the existing tooling files. It's more even like the higher level. Like, do we have written down anywhere what all goes on? What are the pieces? What's like? We start with these markdown files, we end with these HTML files, but there's these things like there's metadata in them. There's, what is it that we generate? Like, I know we generate our website, but we probably also generate some other stuff. And so actually that high level thing that says like, here's what comes in, here's all the pieces, and here's what comes out. To me, that would be quite useful because then people can understand that high level thing and say, okay, well, now I understand what we're changing versus you're changing the black box, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, definitely. Actually, that makes very much sense. If you could create a CTA, I can definitely try to create, even if it's in Google Doc for now, just to keep track of what I'm writing, because I'm not sure also where I should land this. If it should be on core or where.
I think
but I
like
could
that
also-
in that doc contributing, like maintaining the documentation pipeline or something would actually be a pretty good. I find that things get a lot more visibility if they're in core. And
Okay,
this is kind
yeah.
of a maintaining core collaborator maintaining thing. So I think that doc,
Mhm.
but still starting, like if you
Makes
want to start
sense.
in a Google Doc is a good place as well, like until you're ready to do the PR. But
Yeah,
in
actually,
the end, that's where I'd say
PR
it should go.
Yeah, actually, PR already makes sense from the beginning because you just mark down and just documenting whatever happens. Yeah, I will add to my personal notes list so I remember.
Okay. Yeah, and
Just
once
add it to
if you want us to take a look along, because I'd be interested. I poked a little bit at it with like we were trying to get the Electron parser going for the TypeScripts and stuff, but I still don't have a clear picture myself. So I'd be happy to read what you've got and learn and give you any feedback. So.
Okay, regarding Electron, I'm not aware of the topic. What exactly are we doing with Electron?
So Electron has like part of one of the earlier discussions on the documentation and API docs came up in a couple discussions. One, we had like a deep dive on just documentation, but the other one was types. And as you saw, like in the Collaborator Summit, types are still top of people's minds. We don't necessarily want to ship the types for Node, but we want to make it easy for people to be able to generate them. We currently generate, I think it's JSON from the docs, and that's used by the TypeScript.
Yeah, it's a
team,
JSON. Yeah,
but it's not well structured. Basically they can kind of do it, but then they got to do some manual work. So what we wanted to do was improve that. And part of what Electron has a tool, which was this parser, which parses their docs and generates a well-structured output. So part of what part of that other PR that I pointed you to was to put more things in and say and like formalize like everything has to have a header like this and a header like that, so it's easier to parse, and that tool could parse it. And then separately, we were trying to see, can we use their parser to then give us this better output? And that's where that, it was like a tool that already existed. So why not start with that?
Yeah, I will check with, let's see, with Darshan, because he's on an Electron team, if he can link me to the tooling and see if I can also talk.
Yeah, let me see. Do I have anything? I'm sure I documented somewhere what I was doing and playing with. Anyway, I'll look at it afterwards and see if I can ship that over to you, because I did play with it and tweak the parser a little bit, and it's basically where the next step to move things forward really is to get that other PR landed, which is stalled for quite a while. But if we can get movement on that, but it's all related to what you've got. Like as we better structure the docs, we can better do those kinds of things.
One question regarding the node/doc/contributing folder. Do they get generated somewhere or just like pure markdown?
No, they're just pure markdown.
Okay, because there's like not a readme file on the directory, so I don't even know where to start with.
Yeah, no, they're right now they're just a set of docs, which are like, so for example, if you're looking at like HTTP, which is one that has one, our dependencies are one where there's some like, there's a maintaining dependencies, there's a maintaining HTTP, but you're right, it's relatively ad hoc at this point.
Oh, those docs are basically just like general contribution guidelines to the core. I see.
Yeah, it's basically like, hey, like maintaining NPM, if you need to do an NPM update, because we have that as a dependency, it'll be the place that has those instructions, right? And it's in some of the cases like the I'm seeing like, is there a types one in there? Types. So maintaining types for Node.js, That's one that I added based on our discussion in the deep dive to say like, well, here's our strategy, right? So they're all docs that like as a collaborator, if you're going to work in a particular area, it's a place to put some specifics. But it has been growing more ad hoc, and it was not called that something. It was called something else. I don't know what it was called, but it now makes more intuitive sense to me that it's like doc contributing, because now I know where to go and look and find those things.
Gotcha.
So that's where, like I was saying, eventually, like a maintaining the document pipeline is our best. It's our best place of any of the others. Now you're right that at some point we have like a separate collaborator guide, but that separate collaborator guide is more of a high level. How do you land PRs, stuff like that. This could use maybe like, hey, if you want to dive down into any of the areas, here's all the things. You kind of get a table of contents just by looking in the directory, but
yeah, no, that's fine. Now I understand a little bit more about those existing issues. That's great.
Okay. Right. Let me get back to. Can I find our issues? Issues. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting back to the. I'm going to share that. I think this is the right one. View. And actually, so I created that issue. Now I think like maybe it makes sense for us to like right now create an issue, which is to like, we can do that, capture the next steps, PR to capture next steps or capture discussion. If you wanted to like create that, and then we could paste it into the minutes. Does that make sense?
Wait, you're talking with me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you want to create the issue, I could create it, but if you want to create it, then
I can create an issue for I can definitely create an issue for it. Like now.
And I'm also gonna if you can do it right now, then we'll put it in the minutes. Like I figure we might as well use this one as a working session to say like what are all the next steps, and then the following meetings we can actually like I'll tag this one for our agenda, because then it's actually going to start to show up on our agenda so we don't forget. And we can do the same one with any of the others that make sense.
Okay, I just created a blank issue just to keep, track of will properly read the description later.
So here, I'll just grab that then. Oops, that's the wrong. Oh, that's still not the right place either. Okay. If I could type right. Right, okay, so that one, right. Okay, I guess like in terms of the collaborator summit, are there any other sort of next steps that we should plan for, or?
I think we also discuss following the community of at least both Easy Retro. We should try to work, and I can open an issue or even a PR tomorrow if needed, about what question do we want to ask to the community this year, linked to also what we as collaborators we discussed last week.
Right, okay. So I think later on we have the next 10 survey here, right?
Oh yeah. Okay. I didn't know it, so yeah.
So I think, yeah, we can use that one probably to follow on, like, okay, now what's the survey things we should be doing? Because, yeah, we got some good, I think from both of those brainstorms, we can come up with like, okay, some new questions and stuff. Any other collaborator summit things that are worthwhile? I guess if we look at yeah, we'd have to deep dive a little bit more into these to see. That's probably worth a session on its own. So maybe next week we can plan to go through these and say, okay, let's start working on those and how maybe that should adjust our technical priorities. And then how do we highlight with these? I'm going to actually get, what I'd like to do is follow up with the attendees as well. So maybe I'm going to give myself an issue as a reminder to get the attendee list. So, because I think it'd be nice to follow up with the rest of the attendees and say, hey, like, here's the things that were output, and use that as a way to continue some of that discussion. Okay. Anything on that first one that we think we should cover this week before we move on?
Not on my side.
Okay, let's then go to visualization of the technical priorities. I think, Jean, you'd added that one, right?
Yeah, nothing new yet since last week.
Yep.
I still saw nothing new. I will also check maybe, because I'm still not entirely sure on how we want to display that, because we already have a file which show the different action we did on the past year. So I don't know exactly how to display something like that correctly without being almost the same, let's say, as a blank file. So I have to think also about that, because the main issue is, yeah, I could put color on every title on thing we did, but I don't think it's really interesting for everyone to read that.
I think the color is like, it's maybe the very, like, a very compact picture that says we're green on these and red on these other ones. It's kind of interesting, right?
Okay, good try.
But yeah, so it'd be interesting to see what it looks like. We could look at it and say, oh, it doesn't really add anything or not. But I like that idea when you thought of it. So
okay. I will think about something about that.
Okay. Example documentation initiative. This is number 154.
Yeah, so this one was also linked to what we discussed during the next 10 session during the Collaborator Summit. Mainly, it's one of the parts that we discussed, not just being linked to basically being linked to the documentation, but not only to just the pure API side, but what do we want to do for, let's say, newcomer, and it includes both easier documentation, which is no searchable, thanks to the working group working on the new website, but also what do we want to do on some key topic or find article, and how do we want to foster this kind of easy way learning step or something like that for newcomer on the documentation on Node.js.
Yeah, and I think that one, I mean, there's been discussion back and forth, and it's been like the example repo, I don't think has had much activity. And even on some of the websites, what I've heard a few times is like, not that people don't wish we could do more of that, but like we just have not been able to do very much of that, and we don't. the project itself doesn't have the resources to help actively curate those, so they become stale, different things like that. And so the sense I get is like maybe we should stick to the API docs, and it's to the broader community. And if we do anything, it might be to like curate and have links to docs versus anything else, as opposed to having them on our sites. But that's just sort of what I've heard on that one. So I don't know what other people have kind of heard in terms of feedback.
No, I think it was something like that. Also, the main issue is we don't have them just basically the manpower to work on everything, and to mainly that part which require a lot of continuous changes and update, and even more if we want to have example based on multiple version, if sometime we do have some breaking change or stuff like that. So it will require a lot of work on my part, and I would agree with everything you said, Michael, but I think that being a runtime without a way for newcomer to understand, or to have at least link to good resources to find on which case it can be useful, how to use it, basically, even if it doesn't go on every function, but let's say main use case, I would say just if we are talking just about Node.js, let's say, just even basically redirect to some documentation on Fastify or Express or any other framework, because if today you are coming on the Node.js website, okay, you know some stuff about Node.js, but let's be honest, no one is writing HTTP server based only on Node.js, except for some fun part. And if you don't know Express or Fastify and stuff like that, you will just be lost. And it will also maybe hinder our, because I don't think this year we did talk a lot about that, but how do we want to continue as a Node.js, as a JavaScript runtime to be relevant for company? So I think it's also important to have this first step for people.
Claudio has his hand up.
Yeah. So basically, this is an ongoing topic that I've seen a lot of different collaborators discuss. Even, for example, recently we were auditing, for example, all the learn pages that we have on the new website and the guides on the old website. And one common conclusion is that, well, some things to give examples. For example, making HTTP web server, etc. One thing that's very common is to include an example from a library. But the common issue given there is that if we give an example from one library, well, we are kind of advocating people to use the library versus the other libraries, right? So one of the conclusions was that instead of us giving examples of what people can actually, real world applications that people can do with Node.js, we could link to outside resources, because there are hundreds of courses of people saying what you can do with Node.js, and stick with documenting more like how Node.js works, for example, asynchronous modules, having actually a better documentation for how you can understand the file system module, strings module, Node, NMPA, API, or etc. Because one thing that I often get asked for is the current API docs. They're too straight to the point, and many things don't have examples and etc. etc. And I think that goes back to what Michael was saying initially with the huge PR from TNA regarding restructuring how docs are formed. If we have a better docs that have better introduction and better examples of how to do things with Node.js, the modules themselves, and people have an easier way in finding what they need to do. For example, if they just search create a file in Node.js and it directly goes to our docs already to the proper different methods that we allow to create files, then we don't need to have a separate guide how to create files, because there's redundancy, right? And that goes back to the actual developer experience part of the docs, which is non-existent right now. And another thing that we're trying to, solve with the new website. But then just to, TLDR, there's two different things here. The developer experience, how to make docs be better for new people, how, to allow them to become champions of Node.js easier, and the second part, which is what is the content that should actually be inside our docs, Yeah.
I think, like, from my perspective, and I think it's a little bit of what you just said, is we can do a lot of good by improving our API docs. And so actually starting there, like if we get to the point where like our API docs are what we think we'd like them to be, and they're fully, like they have all the examples, they have all those things, that's maybe a good time then to see like, well, do we need extra things beyond that, or are they now covering that, versus like trying to solve both problems at the same time?
Yeah, that's where I think, for example, that currently already our API docs are not just pure API docs in the strict sense of API docs. For example, if you go to npm.js docs, those are API docs. Like, for example, CLI reference, for example, those are references of what is exposed. And our APIs are mixed. They are neither one or another, because in some documentations, for example, in some markdown files, people added examples, added a nice introduction, and others, they're just literally, for example, duplication codes, and boom, just throwing the thing out in your face. And that's where, reaching, better standards and creating, those sustainable documentations, I think that would be a really good goal.
Jean?
Yeah, I would agree with what you said, but the only part is, even if we are talking just about the pure API and we do improve the documentation regarding every API of Node.js, we still have some issue on other subject and topic. Just one we discussed last week was, no one is currently providing a good documentation or example on how to create a library which is compatible both with ESM and CGS, which I think should be our, because you don't rely on other tooling or packages or library to do so. It should be handled by us to have this kind of, I don't know, tutorial. I don't know the name you want to give it, but
mixed feelings. I actually think that this is a great idea, but then there are a few things. It's not just Node.js, because of course you have a package that you want to publish both on CJS and ESM, but I think that the moment that you're talking about the package, you're not talking about Node, just Node itself anymore. You're talking already npm or pnpm, yarn, core pack, please don't, but whatever. You're talking more like a maintainer's perspective, and our docs are not maintainer docs, right? I mean, I'm not saying that we should not have a good maintainer docs, but that's ad hoc on top. For example, there are docs that are not API docs, but I still feel that they're interesting. Is for example, how asynchronous works. For example, the difference between blocking and unblocking on Node.js. This is not an API doc, but there's a documentation how the inner systems of Node.js works. This is something that definitely, for example, makes sense to have. But then, if you're talking about maintainers guide, and even collaborators guide, for example, we have, which talked before, Michael showed this docs/contributing, which is a folder for anybody that collaborates to Node core. Why not having one for maintainers of packages also? And I think that this, even though this is cool for us, Node.js to be part of, this is something way bigger than us. It's like the whole packaging ecosystem, right? And getting everybody else also on board to help us here. For example, I made a survey, and a lot of people use the new website, which is still a draft, to learn how to use npm, because the npm docs right now are just peer references. And even though you can actually find, for example, how to create a package, how to install things, how to, those are issues on npm docs. And if you try to solve, for example, issues from npm in our internal docs, wouldn't that be like we try to cover the whole universe? I mean, we can't do everything just by ourselves. We need help from the whole community, right?
So I did open up, we do have a package maintenance team. And one of the things that team worked on over the years is we do have some docs for maintainers. And that's a group of, it's not in the course. So it does make me think like that would actually be the place where we could put a doc that's like supporting CJS and ESM. And
oh, what feels, I never seen this before. Maybe the visibility of this is not great.
It's again like
No,
we
why
do
can't
some
we
of these
remove it?
things,
Yeah.
and like how do we make them visible is the next challenge. You're right. Like we created these, we had them in drafts, we published them here. At some point, we thought like maybe we would promote them to one of the websites or something like that, but we never pushed it that far, right? So that might be again something to push on a bit.
I mean, that goes. Sorry, just 1 second. That goes. I think something that I think you, John, said on the Collab Summit. I'm not sure if it was you, but documentation for 3 different kind of audiences: user, contributor, and maintainer. So again, visibility of this. Maybe it could make sense for us to, alongside having the API docs in e-commerce, user documentation to also maintain on the website, even if it's just generated or just a scripted, whatever markdown goes then to the website for maintainers and collaborators in Node.js. Because, for example, that photo of doc contributing, that would be really cool if we could actually have it generated on our website. Why not? They are core documentation just for different audiences, which are the collaborators.
If anything, at least like an entry point that says like, hey, there's these kinds of different documentation and here's how you find the different ones. Like they don't all have to be directly on the website and generated. Like even if there's like the entry point that says like, here's the API docs, if you're this kind of user, and there's a package maintenance team. So if you're looking for this kind of guidance, here's the place you can go and so forth. So.
Yeah, I think just a way to reference that, to be able to be found just by someone searching something on Google, and even to follow a link which will link to some repository inside the Node.js organization would be great, because today, like Claudio, this package maintenance team with some documentation or stuff like that, I wasn't even aware that it was existing.
Neither I.
Pretty much the same as the Node API team. I'm aware that there is some documentation because I mainly look at them when I try to find example or some use case, because everything else on internet is deprecated, not working, not up to date, or any other reason. So we should try to find a way, and maybe it could also be something we could be maintained, I would say, slowly by every different kind of working group every time, because we already have the way that when you add something or you publish something or change something in Node Core, you have to update everything linked to the function you are changing, from, let's say, the documentation, maybe the type, JSDoc, and everything else in the future. We should also try to find a way to have people also providing some example and some use case, because having a feature which is not which cannot be understandable or usable by someone which don't deep dive into the JavaScript engine or libuv or something else, it's just mainly useless for us and for maintainers which spend time adding some new feature.
Yeah, I think that it's a big topic that could become another entry for a next session by itself. Yeah, just wanted to say that I need to hop off in a few minutes because I need to go to the gate. I'm still in an airport. But just wanted, if you allow, I know that we have one again, but just hijack the meeting for 1 minute because Joe will not be able to attend the website meeting. Sure. I'm just basically just quickly say a few things for him. So Joe, basically, in terms of current priorities for the new website, basically everything that we had an open topic was achieved, and we're in the final step, just doing the final content integration of the blog posts, and also migrating older versions of the API docs, and then we should be ready with content parity with Node.js aboard.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's it basically,
Cool.
Okay. So I think we should look at the I-18N initiative documentation. Anything we should discuss this week on that one?
Not, I think we already summarized a
Yeah.
little bit about everything because the documentation and the internationalization part are really linked.
Okay.
I think the main point which was raised during the Collaborator Summit, I would say 2 points. One, it will be quite hard to do so, but if we are able to automatize, to add some automation to it, it's easily reproducible for every languages, let's say. Which is, so it's a really the hard part, but the high reward part. Also, I think on my part, discuss a lot about how we can maybe have the community involved on helping on that. And that's also linked to the automation part, because we don't have just basically the manpower to have one maintainer in every languages following and doing it for everything. And also from what was saying Matteo, let's say the secret part and stuff like that, mainly China is really asking, let's say, for that. And it's mainly one of the, I think, country or language at least, which is every day on other languages also really present and want to have their own documentation in their own language. So great benefit for them.
Right. I think it was like if we were going to do one, that would be the one.
It would, yeah. But on my part, if we are able to do one, we should find a way, even if it's a bit harder, to find a way to just have everything automatized, and that way we don't have to manually follow everything, so we can handle multiple language at once.
Right.
Yeah. That also goes back.
I'm sorry, Claudio, go.
Oh, no. I didn't know that you didn't finish talking.
Okay, no, I was just going to say, even if we try to do something from one language like Chinese, no one here will have the time just to do the PR or replicate it manually. We will forget things. It will be different version or pretty much everything. At the start, we have to think how we can work with that without human people doing some, I don't know, transfer between the official English documentation and the one in another language.
Yeah, another important thing, for example, that exactly is because any moment that, for example, the English version gets updated because of an API change, the metadata change of whatever, it's really hard to keep track which translations need to also get updated. For example, on the new website, in theory, you can already translate the APIs because it supports already. The generated version now supports translation, but there was a person who was already eager to start translation the whole thing in French and was like, hold on, even though it works, the thing is that every time the API changes, you need to update the whole thing again. Not the whole thing, but pinpointing the diff, it's very hard. Hence, where, for example, that metadata proposal, where the metadata is separated from examples, description, introduction, etc., is where it will drastically reduce, the churn of this problem. Because by removing the metadata, the actual API part of the equation, it means that, for example, description and examples, it is something way more easy to update because examples you just copy, and description, it's not something that changes that often. So translating the actual human part of the content becomes easier because you don't need to care about the technical part of the content, or not as much.
Okay, I think we've basically run out of time.
Yeah.
So I'd suggest we close out for this week. We've got some good next actions. If people can work on any of those before next time, that'd be great, or at least be prepared to next time to review some of the brainstorming from the previous the collaborator session, and then we can sort of dig into those details next time. I think that's our next steps.
Yeah, and I think it should be great also next time to, after we work on that, to really find some time, maybe before the end of the year, to really have a deep dive on the documentation on what we discussed today and what we will have worked next time. This is a great project which will require a lot of time and effort from, I think, a lot of people also.
Right. I think if Claudio is going to put together that that top level issue that's sort of like, here's the output from the collaborator summit, and even if it's like the high level proposal, we can, I think I tagged that for the agenda, so we can make sure to cover that. And once I think there's enough there, we can maybe schedule like another summit to get people involved and sort of validate and brainstorm and hopefully get more people involved.
I'll just say really quickly too, at IBM, we have this sort of jumpstart program where we try to get young devs, newer devs into open source. And I have someone who's interested in contributing to Node.js, and, you know, helping on docs work could be something. So if you know of anything that someone could help with, that's sort of a good first issue, please reach out and I'll help point someone there.
Okay, I'm gonna say bye. We'll talk to everybody next time.
Are you going to the TSC meeting, Michael? Is that what's next? Okay, so no reference architecture. Got it.
Yeah, I moved it to next week.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye, folks.